Echoes of the Cursed Forest, by Edgar Morrigan. Chapter 1. The Whispering Trees. The village of Eldergrove had always been a place where time moved gently, a place where the heart of the forest could still be heard in the rustling of its leaves. Children would run barefoot through the soft earth, and the elders would sit by their hearths, telling tales of spirits that roamed the forest but never ventured near the village. It was a peaceful life, one entwined with the rhythm of nature itself, but all that changed on the eve of the harvest moon. The night sky had turned an unnatural shade of violet, the stars hidden behind thick, brooding clouds that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. As the moon rose above the horizon, casting a ghostly light on the village, strange things began to stir. First, it was the air. The once crisp autumn breeze had grown still, as if holding its breath. Then came the sound, a soft, distant whisper, too faint to understand, but it filled the air nonetheless. By dawn, the village was changed. The once vibrant fields stood empty, the crops withered and dried as though the earth itself had been drained of life. The animals, once a bustling presence, had vanished, their tracks leading into the dense woods where no one dared venture. The villagers gathered in the town square, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes wide with the fear of the unknown. A man named Roderick stood at the edge of the crowd, his eyes fixed on the dark silhouette of the forest beyond. He was the village's unofficial protector, a man who had grown up hearing the stories of the cursed woods but had never once believed them. But now, as he stared into the heart of that forest, a growing unease gnawed at his gut. The whispers, though faint, seemed to be calling from within. "Roderick," came the voice of Eldera, the village elder, her hands trembling as she gripped his arm. "Something has changed. The spirits, they are angry." The words hit him like a blow, but he nodded, swallowing the fear that rose in his throat. The legends had always spoken of a great forest spirit, a force older than the village itself, one that was said to guard the ancient trees from harm. But the forest had always been a silent watcher, its anger never more than a murmur in the wind until now. "I'll go," Roderick said, his voice steadier than he felt. "We need to know what's happening." Eldera's eyes darkened with sorrow. "Be careful. The forest does not forget." As Roderick made his way toward the forest's edge, the weight of his decision settled over him like a shadow. He had heard the stories as a child, tales of those who wandered too far and were never seen again, of those who heard the whispers and went mad. He had never believed in such things, always chalking them up to old wives' tales. But now, as he stepped forward, the path ahead seemed unnaturally dark, the trees closing in like a wall with each step. The whispers grew louder, becoming clearer, and yet still indistinct. He could feel the air thickening around him, pressing in from all sides as though the forest itself were alive, watching him. The ground beneath his feet felt wrong, shifting with each step as though the earth had become soft, malleable, alive. The deeper he went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It was as if the trees were closing in on him, their branches twisting together above, blocking out what little light remained. The wind, once still, began to howl through the branches, carrying with it voices that sounded human, yet twisted with something ancient, something malevolent. Suddenly, he heard a sound that made his heart race, a low, guttural growl, like the growl of a beast, but deeper, older. Roderick stopped in his tracks, every muscle in his body tensed, his breath shallow as he strained to listen. There it was again, louder this time, closer, and then, through the shadows, a figure emerged. A woman, cloaked in tattered robes, her face hidden beneath a hood. She moved like a wraith, her feet barely touching the ground, her presence as unsettling as the darkness that surrounded her. The whispers seemed to quiet in her presence, as if even the forest feared her. Roderick stepped back, unsure whether to approach or retreat. The woman's voice, when it came, was soft but filled with a cold certainty. "You should not have come," she said, her voice echoing in the stillness. "The forest remembers, and it will not let you leave." Roderick's heart pounded in his chest as he gathered his courage. "What is happening? What do you want?" The woman lifted her head slightly, revealing eyes that seemed to reflect the void itself, empty and endless. "The spirits are angry," she whispered. "They have awakened, and now they will not rest until their vengeance is satisfied." Roderick's breath caught in his throat as he realized the truth of her words. The peaceful village of Eldergrove was now a prisoner of the very forest that had once been its protector, and there was no way out. Before he could speak, the ground beneath him shifted violently, the earth cracking open with a terrible roar. The trees around him groaned and creaked as though waking from a deep slumber, and the sky above seemed to darken even further, pressing down on him like a weight. The woman turned, her figure fading into the shadows as she spoke one last time. "The curse has begun. The echoes of the past will not be silenced until all are claimed." And then, she was gone. Roderick stood alone, the weight of her words settling heavily on him. The forest had come alive, and it would not let them go. The village was trapped, and it was only a matter of time before the spirits claimed them all. As he turned to make his way back, the whispers returned, louder this time, swirling around him like a storm. They were calling, beckoning, urging him to join them. And deep within the heart of the forest, something stirred. Chapter 2: The Curse Unleashed. Roderick returned to the village in a daze, his mind spinning with the woman's words and the terrifying presence of the forest. The whispering voices still echoed in his head, as though they had followed him from the woods and now clung to him like a second skin. He had never believed in curses, nor in the tales the elders whispered, but something had shifted. He could feel it now, in the air around him, in the very earth beneath his feet, a heaviness that pressed down on the village like a suffocating fog. As he approached the village square, the villagers looked at him with anxious eyes, their faces pale and drawn, a silent understanding passing between them. They knew something was wrong, but none dared speak of it openly. The stillness of the morning had left a mark on the land, and though the sun shone brightly overhead, there was a chill that had taken root in every corner of the village. Eldra was waiting for him by the old oak tree, her face lined with concern. "Roderick," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years lived in quiet fear. "You've seen it, haven't you? The forest, it stirs again." He nodded, his throat tight. "The curse is real, Eldera. The spirits are awake, and they're angry. I saw her, the woman from the forest. She said the echoes of the past would claim us all." Eldera's eyes widened, her lips trembling as if she had feared this moment would come. "The woman, who did you see?" "A figure," Roderick replied. "She was cloaked, and her eyes," his voice faltered. "They were empty. As though she had no soul." Eldera's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wild with terror. "No, it cannot be her. It must not be. Who is she?" Roderick asked, desperate for answers. "She is the spirit of vengeance," Eldera whispered, her voice barely audible. "The one who was wronged long ago, when the church sank beneath the waves. She has been waiting for centuries, and now she has returned. Her anger has awakened the forest. Roderick's chest tightened. The church? What do you mean? Eldora glanced around, as if afraid the trees themselves might be listening. She beckoned Roderick to follow her, leading him to the small hut she called home. Inside, the air was thick with incense, the smell of herbs and old leather filling the space. She motioned for him to sit, her hands shaking as she poured him a cup of water. It is said that the church was built atop an ancient burial ground, Eldora began, her eyes darkening with the weight of history. Long ago, the people of Eldergrove sought to build a place of worship, not knowing that the land they chose had been sacred to the spirits of the forest. They desecrated it, and in return, the spirits cursed them. But the church remained standing, a beacon of defiance against the old gods. Roderick listened intently, his heart heavy with a sense of foreboding. So the spirits are angry because of what was done to them? Yes, Eldora replied. But it is more than that. There was one man, an elder of the village, who made a pact with the spirits, believing that by offering sacrifices, he could keep their wrath at bay. But it was a lie. The pact was not meant to be broken, and when the church sank into the sea, the forest's fury was unleashed. The woman you saw is the spirit of that pact, the one who waits for the moment when the village will pay the price for its sins. Roderick stared at her, his mind racing. Then why hasn't the curse affected us before now? Eldora's voice dropped to a whisper. Because for generations, the pact held. But now, the bloodline of the elder who made that deal is nearly extinct. The forest is hungry, and the spirits are calling for the one who can break the pact. Roderick's eyes widened in realization. You're saying, the only way to stop this is to break the pact? Eldora nodded gravely. Yes. But it is not simple. The pact must be undone before the spirits take everything. The village, the forest, even you. If you do not act quickly, there will be no one left to save. The room seemed to close in on him, the weight of her words pressing down on his chest. Roderick felt as if the very ground beneath him was shifting, as though the earth itself were slowly pulling him toward some dark, inevitable fate. I'll do what I must, Roderick said, his voice steady but filled with a deep, gnawing fear. Where do I begin? Eldora's gaze turned to the window, her eyes unfocused as she looked out into the distance. The answer lies in the forest. But it is not just the forest you must confront, it is the echoes of the past. The spirits will not let you break the pact without a price. You must find the source of the curse, the heart of it, and destroy it before it consumes you. As she spoke, the wind outside howled through the trees, the sound of the forest alive with a quiet fury. Roderick's skin prickled, and for a moment, he swore he could hear the whispering voices again, urging him to follow them, to come deeper into the woods. You must go now, Eldora urged, her voice shaking with the urgency of the moment. The longer you wait, the stronger the spirits become. They will not let you leave once you have entered their domain. Roderick stood, his heart pounding in his chest. There was no time to waste. He had no choice but to face the cursed forest, to confront the spirits that sought vengeance for the sins of the past. The fate of Eldergrove and his own survival depended on it. As he stepped outside, the air was thick with anticipation. The village had fallen silent, as if holding its breath. The once peaceful life of Eldergrove was now a distant memory, replaced by a creeping dread that settled in every corner of the village. The trees seemed to loom over him, their twisted branches reaching toward him like skeletal hands, urging him forward. With a final glance at the village, Roderick turned toward the forest, his heart heavy with the weight of what was to come. The echoes of the past were calling, and there would be no turning back. Chapter 3: The Whispering Shadows. The path leading into the heart of the cursed forest seemed to stretch endlessly before Roderick, as though the trees themselves were conspiring to trap him. Their gnarled branches intertwined overhead, casting long, dark shadows that danced like spectral figures, hiding secrets older than the village itself. The air grew colder with every step, and the once familiar sounds of the village laughter, the occasional clink of metal from the blacksmith's shop, faded into a hollow silence that pressed in on him from all sides. Roderick's breath quickened, his heart pounding with each footstep. He had never felt such dread before, nor such a gnawing sensation that the very ground beneath him was alive, watching, waiting. The whispers that Elderer had spoken of were no longer just in his mind, they were real. Faint, distant at first, like the murmur of an old song carried by the wind, they grew louder as he ventured deeper into the forest. Turn back, leave this place. You do not belong here. The voices were faint but unmistakable. Their words were laced with malice, a soft, velvety hiss that clung to his skin, making the hairs on his neck stand at attention. He paused, his eyes scanning the twisted trunks of the trees that surrounded him. The shadows seemed to shift and pulse as if alive, and for a moment, Roderick thought he saw figures moving just beyond his vision, strange, dark shapes that flickered in and out of existence, like fleeting glimpses of forgotten nightmares. His mind raced. He had been warned. The spirits would stop at nothing to keep the curse intact. But there was something else, something deeper, a connection between the forest and the spirits that made his very presence here feel like a violation of some sacred law. The air around him was thick with ancient power, an oppressive weight that pressed on him from all sides. He continued forward, his resolve hardening with every step, though fear gnawed at him from within. He was not prepared for what he was about to face, but the curse was real, and the village was counting on him. There could be no turning back now. The trees began to thin, revealing a clearing ahead. In the center, something caught his eye, a structure, half submerged in the earth and twisted with the roots of the forest. It was an old altar, weathered by time and decay, its stone surface covered in a layer of thick, black moss. Roderick felt a chill crawl up his spine as he approached, a sense of dread clinging to him like the very air around him. This was the heart of the forest, the place where the curse had begun. As he neared the altar, he saw the remnants of what had once been symbols, runes, ancient and faded, carved into the stone. He knelt beside the altar, his fingers grazing the surface of the moss, feeling the cold, slick texture beneath his skin. His mind raced. This was where the pact had been made. This was the place where the spirits had been bound, and where the anger of the forest had been born. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden shift in the air, a subtle, almost imperceptible change that made the very atmosphere feel thicker, charged with a palpable tension. The ground beneath him trembled, just slightly, as though the earth itself was awakening. And then, without warning, the whispers grew louder, closer. You have come to undo what was done, but do you know the cost? The voice was a low growl, echoing from all directions, reverberating in Roderick's bones. He stood abruptly, his heart hammering in his chest as he scanned the clearing. There, in the shadows, stood a figure, a woman, cloaked in tattered robes, her face obscured by a veil of long, wet hair. Her presence was chilling, as though the very air turned colder with her arrival. She did not move, but her eyes, those empty, soulless eyes, stared directly at him, freezing him in place. I am here to break the pact, Roderick managed to choke out, his voice trembling. I know the curse must end. The woman's lips curled into a smile, though it was more a grimace than a gesture of warmth. You think you can break it, she whispered, her voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. Do you think the forest will allow you to undo what has been done? Roderick's throat tightened as he took a step back. He had expected resistance, but this was something beyond mere opposition. This was a manifestation of the curse itself, something ancient, powerful, and filled with a hatred that ran deep through the veins of the earth. I must, he said, his voice steadying with the force of his conviction. The village, the lives of everyone there depend on it. The woman's laugh echoed through the trees, a sound like dry leaves rustling in the wind. It was not a sound of mirth, but one of bitter, agonizing sorrow. The village, she whispered, her voice taking on a tone of sorrowful understanding. The village is already lost, boy. You are too late. The curse cannot be broken, for it is the very essence of this place. It will consume all who seek to destroy it. Roderick stepped forward, his resolve hardening. I won't let it. As he spoke, the ground beneath him trembled once more, the trees groaning as if in pain. The woman's figure began to distort, her form blurring like smoke in the wind. Her voice, now a shrill, haunting wail, echoed through the clearing, the trees shaking with the force of her scream. Then you will join us, she hissed, and in that moment, the very air seemed to crush in on him, suffocating him with a weight that threatened to swallow him whole. Roderick gasped for air, struggling to move as the forest seemed to close in around him. The whispering spirits grew louder, their voices rising in a deafening chorus, drowning out all sense of reason. He reached out, desperate, his hand brushing against the altar. The moment his fingers touched the stone, a surge of power shot through him, a violent wave of energy that knocked him off his feet. As he lay there, gasping for breath, he felt something stir beneath the earth, something ancient and furious, rising from the depths. The curse had awakened fully now, and there would be no easy escape. Chapter 4: The Heart of the Curse. Roderick lay on the ground, dazed and gasping, as the echoes of the forest's angry spirits reverberated in his skull. The earth beneath him seemed to pulse with a dark, throbbing rhythm like the heartbeat of the forest itself. His fingers dug into the cold stone of the altar, seeking some form of grounding, but it was as if the earth had grown alive, its energy twisting around him, pulling him deeper into the very marrow of the curse. The woman's form was gone, but her presence lingered in the air, oppressive and suffocating. Roderick could feel the weight of her gaze upon him, even though she no longer stood before him. He forced himself to sit up, trembling, his body aching from the force of the unseen power that had just washed over him. His breath came in shallow gasps as he looked around, his heart hammering in his chest. The trees, once still, now seemed to shift with purpose. Their branches swayed, though there was no wind to stir them. The whispers, those maddening voices, had multiplied, their tone rising from a mere murmur to an insistent clamor. Roderick could hear fragments of their words, fragments of their pain, their fury, their longing join us, lost, never to leave. It is already too late. The forest has claimed you. He staggered to his feet, his mind reeling. The curse was ancient, insidious. It seeped into every crack of the earth, into every fiber of the trees, into every breath of the wind. There was no way to understand it fully, no simple incantation or ancient ritual that could undo what had been bound here for centuries, and yet, he couldn't give up. The village depended on him. He was their only hope. He turned away from the altar, forcing himself to ignore the trembling fear that clawed at his insides. He needed answers. He needed to understand what had happened here, what dark force had bound the forest to the lives of those who had once lived in its shadow. The wind began to stir again, carrying with it the familiar scent of wet earth, of damp moss, and something else, something sharp and metallic, like blood. His stomach churned, but he pressed on, following the narrow path that wound deeper into the heart of the cursed wood. The further he ventured, the more intense the whispers became. They no longer sounded like distant voices, but like 1,000 souls pressing in on him from all directions. He could almost feel their cold fingers brushing against his skin, could almost hear their breath, ragged and wet, in the back of his throat. You cannot escape. The past will never let you go. Roderick's heart raced, his mind spinning with the realization that the spirits weren't just trapped, they were angry, bitter, seeking vengeance. They were bound to the land, cursed by something far more powerful than any man-made pact. He couldn't help but think of the village, of the people who had suffered so much already. Were they doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past? Was there any way to stop the spirits from claiming them as they had claimed so many others? The path ahead narrowed, and Roderick stumbled into a small clearing. At its center stood an enormous tree, its bark blackened and charred, its branches twisted and gnarled like the hands of the dead. Beneath it, the earth was cracked open, revealing a dark chasm, as though the ground itself had been split wide in some ancient cataclysm. Roderick approached cautiously, feeling an unnatural chill radiating from the opening. The whispers were louder here, more urgent, and the ground trembled beneath his feet as though it were alive, threatening to swallow him whole. His eyes fell on something strange at the edge of the chasm, something half buried beneath a pile of dry leaves and decaying moss. Kneeling, he reached out, his hand trembling as he cleared the debris to reveal an object of dark, twisted beauty. It was an ornate, iron key, rusted with age, its intricate design unlike anything he had ever seen before. There were strange markings etched into its surface, symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint, ethereal glow. He picked it up carefully, feeling a strange sensation surge through him as his fingers wrapped around its cold metal form. It was as if the key recognized him, as if it was waiting for him to touch it. The key, the voices whispered, "It has always been yours." Roderick's pulse quickened, and his thoughts swirled with confusion and fear. The key, what did it open? What was it meant for? A sudden flash of memory struck him. Eldera's warning. She had spoken of a key, an ancient artifact that could unlock the curse. Could this be it? The answer to everything? Or was it merely another cruel trick of the spirits? Another test that would push him further into the grasp of the curse. The ground beneath him trembled once more, this time violently, and a voice stronger, more forceful than the others, boomed through the clearing. "Leave now, or join us in eternity." Roderick's heart raced. He could feel the pressure building in the air, the forest itself pushing against him, its ancient power threatening to crush him. But he couldn't leave, not yet. He had come this far. and he couldn't turn back. Not now. He rose slowly, clutching the key tightly in his hand, and turned his gaze toward the chasm before him. Somewhere, deep in the forest, in the heart of the curse, lay the truth. And with this key, he would find it. Chapter 5. The Hollow Call. The eerie stillness of the forest was broken only by the unsettling rustle of dry leaves beneath Roderick's boots as he walked deeper into the heart of the cursed woods. The iron key, still cold in his palm, seemed to burn with an unseen force, urging him forward. The whispers had grown louder with each step, becoming a chorus of anguished voices that carried the weight of centuries of torment. Roderick tried to shake off the creeping sense of dread that clung to him like a shroud, but every step he took felt like an affront to the spirits. Every breath he drew seemed to draw him further into their web. His thoughts were a blur. He needed answers. He needed to stop this madness before it consumed the village. Yet, the path ahead seemed to twist and writhe like the very soul of the forest, as if it were intent on drawing him deeper into its insidious heart. The key pulsed again in his hand, its cold surface somehow becoming warmer, more alive. His mind raced with possibilities. Was this the key to the curse itself? Could it truly unlock the path to salvation, or was it just another cruel manifestation of the spirit's manipulations? The whispers were now more distinct, more insistent, and in the distance, something else reached Roderick's ears, a low, hollow cry that echoed through the trees like the wail of a lost soul. The sound seemed to beckon him, pulling at his chest like a magnetic force. He quickened his pace, his heart hammering in his chest as the cry grew louder, a terrible, mournful sound that sent chills crawling up his spine. The trees around him twisted and groaned, their branches stretching towards him like skeletal hands. It was as if the forest itself was trying to keep him from his goal, warning him with every tortured gust of wind. And then, through the dense thicket of gnarled branches and hanging moss, Roderick saw it, a clearing bathed in an unnatural, pale light. In the center, a great stone altar stood, its surface slick with moisture, as though it had been recently disturbed. The air around the altar was thick with the weight of death, a palpable presence that pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. Atop the altar lay a figure, a woman, draped in tattered robes that seemed to merge with the earth itself. Her hair, black as night, cascaded down over her face, obscuring her features. She lay still, but the faintest tremor passed through her form, as if she were caught between life and death. Roderick approached cautiously, his senses on high alert. The key in his hand throbbed with an almost unbearable intensity, as though it were calling to the woman on the altar. The air around him crackled with energy, and the whispers reached a crescendo, all seeming to speak in one voice: "She is the key." Roderick's breath caught in his throat as he knelt beside the altar, his heart racing. The woman's features were pale, her skin almost translucent, and her eyes were closed, but he could feel her presence, her soul trapped within the confines of the altar, bound by some dark power. There was something about her that seemed both familiar and alien, as if she had once been a part of the village, a part of the curse itself. As his fingers brushed against the stone, the woman's eyes snapped open. The pupils were black as the void, an endless abyss that seemed to swallow the light around her. She didn't speak at first, only stared at him with an intensity that made Roderick's blood run cold. "You have come for answers," she said, her voice low and broken, as if it had been dragged from the depths of some long-forgotten grave. Roderick nodded, unable to speak, the words caught in his throat. The air around him seemed to hum with the energy of 100 souls trapped in torment, their suffering imprinted on every stone, every branch, every leaf. "What is this place?" he finally managed to ask, his voice trembling. "This is the heart of the curse," the woman replied, her voice becoming a mere whisper, as though speaking caused her great pain. "This is where it began, where the pact was made. The forest is not just a place, it is alive, bound to the souls of those who perished here. And now it seeks to claim you, too." Roderick's grip on the key tightened. "What must I do? How do I break this curse?" The woman's lips curled into a faint, sorrowful smile, but there was no joy in it, only a deep, ancient sadness. "To break the curse, you must face the one who bound it. The one who sacrificed everything for power, for immortality." Roderick's mind spun. He had thought the curse to be a force of nature, something older than any of them could understand, but now he realized it was a dark, twisted legacy, a pact made by someone long forgotten. Who was he? Who is the one behind this? "The heart of the forest still beats," the woman said softly. "He is its master, and the forest has claimed his soul. His spirit is bound to this land, he is both here and nowhere. He is the forest, and the forest is him." Roderick's mind reeled. The man who had caused this suffering was still alive in some form, still tethered to the land, to the curse. And yet, his identity remained shrouded in mystery. He could feel the ground trembling beneath him as the whispers grew louder, more frantic. The forest was closing in, its ancient hunger rising, drawn to the one who dared to seek answers. Roderick knew then that he had no choice. He could not turn back. The village, the lives of those who depended on him, were at stake. To face the curse, to end it, he would have to go deeper into the heart of the forest than anyone had ever dared. He turned to the woman, but she was gone, vanished into the mist, as if she had never been there at all. With a final glance at the altar, Roderick rose to his feet and stepped forward, the key still pulsing in his hand. He was ready to confront the spirit, ready to uncover the dark history that had led to this nightmarish legacy, but the forest was not ready to let him go. The trees groaned, the wind howled, and the whispers turned to screams, and in the distance, something moved, something ancient and powerful, something that watched and waited. Roderick was no longer just a man walking through the woods. He was part of the curse now, a pawn in a game that had been played long before his birth. And the forest would not let him leave. Chapter 6: The Hollow Eyes. Roderick's footsteps faltered as the forest seemed to close in on him, the trees pressing in like the thick, twisted fingers of some ancient, unseen hand. The air was thick with dampness and the smell of decay, and the whispers around him had taken on a sinister edge. It was no longer the soft murmur of distant voices, it was a low, guttural chorus of agony, the sound of suffering that seemed to reverberate in the very ground beneath him. He gripped the key tighter, as if its presence could protect him from the unseen forces that circled in the dark. Each step forward was an act of defiance against the very nature of this cursed place, but he could feel the pulse of something vast and malevolent beneath the surface, watching him with an ever-growing hunger. As he moved deeper, the mist began to thicken, swirling around his feet in tendrils of white, obscuring the path ahead. He stumbled, his breath shallow, the weight of the key growing heavier in his hand. He had to find the source of the curse. He had to end this madness before it consumed the village, before it consumed him. The air seemed to grow colder with each passing moment, and Roderick pulled his coat tighter around his body. The wind carried an odd scent, something metallic, mingled with the scent of rotting leaves. It was a smell that reminded him of blood, fresh and warm, but it also carried the bitter tang of death, of things long forgotten. In the distance, the faintest outline of a structure emerged from the mist, a crumbling stone edifice, half submerged in the earth, its jagged silhouette reaching out like the remains of a dying giant. The hollow cathedral. Roderick's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The place the woman on the altar had spoken of. The heart of the curse. He quickened his pace, desperation creeping into his every movement. He had to reach it. There was no turning back now. As he approached, the ground beneath him became uneven, the earth soft and treacherous, as if something unseen was shifting beneath his feet. The hollow cathedral loomed ahead, its once proud arches now sunken into the earth, its stonework worn by the cruel touch of time. A sense of wrongness radiated from the place, an oppressive aura that seemed to press against his chest, making it difficult to breathe. He stepped through the shattered archway, the sound of his boots echoing in the hollow emptiness. The air was thick with the weight of forgotten prayers, the remnants of lives lost to the endless cycle of despair. The walls were lined with faded murals, their colors long since bled away by the passage of time, but even in their faded state, they seemed to tell a story of betrayal, of broken vows, of the ancient pact that had damned this place. Roderick's eyes darted around the crumbling interior, searching for any sign of what lay hidden within. The whispers had grown louder again, but now they were joined by something else, a low, unearthly growl, as if the very stones of the cathedral were alive, reverberating with the cursed energy that had festered here for centuries. He moved forward, the key in his hand thrumming with an almost unbearable intensity, urging him onward. It seemed to call to the very heart of the cathedral, as though it knew its purpose, knew that its time had come. The floor beneath him groaned as he walked, the very structure seeming to tremble in anticipation. At the far end of the cathedral, a great stone altar stood, its surface cracked and scarred by time. But there, etched into the stone, was a symbol, a sigil he recognized. It was the same mark that had appeared in the dreams, the same mark that had haunted the villagers for years. The key pulsed again, and Roderick felt an overwhelming compulsion to approach the altar. He stepped forward, his mind reeling with the weight of what he had learned, what he had seen. The altar, with its ancient sigil, was the focal point of the curse. This was where the pact had been sealed. He stood before the altar, his breath coming in shallow gasps, and placed the key on the stone. As soon as his fingers released their grip, the sigil began to glow, its edges lighting up with an eerie, unearthly light. The whispers reached a deafening crescendo, filling his head with 1,000 voices, all crying out in pain and fury. Suddenly, the ground beneath him cracked open, and a wave of cold air swept through the cathedral, extinguishing the faint light of the sigil. A shadow rose from the altar, tall and dark, its form shifting like smoke, coalescing into something that was not quite human. The creature that emerged was a grotesque, twisted mockery of a man, his features distorted, his eyes hollow and black as the abyss. He was both there and not there, as if his form was nothing more than a wraith, a lingering remnant of something that should not exist. "You have come," the creature rasped, its voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "You have come to break the pact, but you do not understand. You are too late." Roderick's heart hammered in his chest as the creature took a step forward, the air around it rippling with dark energy. "The pact cannot be undone," it continued, its voice echoing through the cathedral. "The forest belongs to me now. The curse is mine to command, and those who enter will never leave. Roderick gritted his teeth, his grip on the key tightening. He was not going to let this thing, this abomination, destroy everything. He had to find a way to end it. But the creature's hollow eyes bore into him, and he could feel the weight of its malevolent gaze. It is already too late, the creature whispered again, its voice slithering into Roderick's mind. The forest will claim your soul, as it has claimed all others. There is no escape. Roderick could feel the forest around him closing in, its roots rising from the ground, its branches reaching like claws, all driven by the curse's ancient hunger. But the key in his hand, still glowing faintly, told him that there was hope. There had to be. With a cry of defiance, Roderick raised the key high above his head. The sigil on the altar flared with light, and the cathedral seemed to tremble with a terrible, rumbling force. "This ends now," Roderick whispered, his voice steady despite the terror that gripped him. The creature let out a scream, its form flickering and twisting as the light from the key intensified. The walls of the cathedral cracked and groaned, the very foundations shaking. The air grew thick with the scent of burning wood, and the whispers turned into a cacophony of rage. Then, in a burst of blinding light, the creature vanished, consumed by the power of the key. The cathedral shook one final time, its crumbling walls collapsing inward as the curse began to unravel. Roderick stood in the center of the chaos, the echoes of the curse fading away, replaced by a silence so deep it seemed to swallow him whole. The forest, too, was quiet, no longer whispering, no longer alive with the restless spirits that had tormented the village. It was over. But as Roderick turned to leave the ruins of the cathedral, he couldn't shake the feeling that something remained, something that had been left behind, waiting. The curse had been broken, but the forest was still there, its roots still buried deep in the earth. And it would wait, forever, for the next soul foolish enough to enter. Chapter 7: The Forest's Echo. Roderick stood amidst the ruins of the hollow cathedral, the air around him thick with the scent of burnt wood and ancient decay. The echoes of the curse had faded, but the forest still whispered. It was no longer the malevolent roar of a forgotten pact, but a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath his feet. He felt it in his bones, an unsettling presence, an awareness that had not been fully extinguished. The cathedral had fallen, its stones crumbling and splitting as the curse unraveled. Yet, despite the destruction, the land felt unchanged, as if the roots of the curse still clung to the earth beneath. It was as if the forest itself, in all its ancient, twisted glory, had absorbed the remnants of that dark energy, forever linking its spirit to the land. Roderick's eyes scanned the horizon, the village nowhere in sight. The mist had returned, thicker than ever, curling around the trunks of the trees like a living thing. The wind carried with it whispers once more, though now they were softer, more mournful, like the sighs of souls who had been freed but had nowhere to go. Their voices clung to the mist, floating through the gaps between the trees, brushing against Roderick's skin like forgotten memories. He stepped cautiously, the key still clutched tightly in his hand. It had stopped pulsing with light after the creature had been banished, but it hadn't lost its weight, its promise. It was a relic of the past, of something ancient and unknowable, and Roderick couldn't shake the feeling that it had more to reveal, more to give. His steps were slow as he moved deeper into the forest, away from the cathedral's ruins. The trees towered above him, their gnarled branches twisting like fingers clawing at the sky. He had heard stories of this forest when he was a child, stories of an ancient power, a curse that lived beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to rise again. But those were just stories, weren't they? Folklore and old wives' tales. Yet here he was, standing on the very soil that had given birth to those stories, feeling the weight of the forest's presence pressing in on him. The forest had claimed so much. So many lives had been lost to its thirst for vengeance. And yet, in the back of Roderick's mind, a chilling thought began to grow. What if it hadn't been banished? What if it had only been awakened? The ground beneath his feet shifted suddenly, the earth soft and giving as though it was swallowing his steps whole. Roderick stopped, feeling the shift in the atmosphere, the way the air seemed to vibrate with anticipation. He wasn't alone. He had never been alone. He glanced up and saw, far in the distance, a figure moving through the trees. The silhouette was indistinct, blurred by the mist, but there was something undeniably familiar about the way it moved. The figure paused and turned towards him, and for the briefest moment, Roderick could have sworn he saw a flash of recognition in its eyes. "Roderick," a voice whispered, though the word was swallowed by the wind. He froze. The voice, it wasn't a dream, not a whisper from the past. It was here. It was real. He knew that voice, though it had been years since he had last heard it. Before he could call out, the figure turned and disappeared into the trees, swallowed by the mist as quickly as it had appeared. Roderick's heart pounded in his chest, and a cold sweat broke out across his skin. He had to follow. He had to know what it was, who it was. That voice, it had come from the past, from the heart of the village that had suffered so much. He sprinted forward, his legs carrying him through the dense underbrush, the weight of the key pressing against his chest with every step. The mist parted in front of him, swirling around his legs, but the figure was always just out of reach, always moving further into the darkness. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and Roderick's ears rang with the cacophony. The voices, the faces, all blending together, villagers, lost souls, those who had entered the forest and never returned. The trees seemed to close in around him, their twisted limbs reaching out like the hands of the damned. He could feel their eyes on him, could feel the weight of their gaze, heavy and unrelenting. The figure was still ahead, just a shadow among shadows. Roderick pushed forward, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Every step he took seemed to pull him deeper into the forest, deeper into the heart of its malevolent force. It was no longer just a place of haunting memories. It was alive, pulsating with an energy that felt like it had been waiting for him all along. Finally, he broke through the trees and found himself standing in a clearing, the mist parting as if it had been drawn back by an invisible hand. At the center of the clearing was an ancient stone well, its edges cracked and weathered by time. The air was thick with the scent of decay, but there was something else, a strange sweetness that clung to the air, like the scent of flowers long forgotten. And there, standing by the well, was the figure. A woman. Her hair was dark, nearly black, and it tumbled in waves around her shoulders, though it seemed to move with a life of its own. Her eyes, when they turned towards him, were hollow, deep, endless voids that seemed to swallow the light. She was dressed in a tattered gown, its once white fabric now stained with the blood of the forest, the dirt of centuries. Her skin was pale, translucent, like she was not quite there, like she had stepped from a world that no longer existed. "Roderick," she whispered again, her voice soft as the rustling of leaves. "You've returned." His heart stopped in his chest. He knew her. He knew her from the stories, from the paintings in the village hall. She had been lost to the forest, consumed by it. A spirit. A ghost, but how? Why have you come back? She asked, her voice tinged with sorrow. Don't you know? You cannot leave. None of us can. Roderick took a step forward, his mind racing. I don't understand. What happened? Why are you here? The woman's eyes filled with a strange, hollow sadness. The forest has a way of claiming those who wander too far. It doesn't let go. Not now. Not ever. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and the mist thickened once more. The forest seemed to press in from all sides, as though it were a living thing, its breath hot and heavy on his skin. Roderick could feel the darkness closing around him, could feel the weight of the curse pressing in on him from every direction. You should leave, the woman said, her voice now tinged with a warning. Before it's too late. Roderick opened his mouth to speak, to ask more, but the words caught in his throat. The ground beneath him began to tremble, and from the depths of the well, a low, rumbling sound rose, like the growl of some ancient beast awakening. The forest was calling to him again, and this time, there was no escaping its grasp. Chapter 8. The Binding. Roderick's heart pounded as the ground trembled beneath his feet, the rumbling rising from the depths of the ancient well like the growl of some ancient beast stirring in its lair. The woman before him, a figure from the village's darkest past, had begun to fade into the mist, her presence diminishing as though the very air could not contain her. Her voice, though, remained whispering in his ears, a warning that cut through the thickening fog. Leave now, she begged, her form becoming increasingly transparent, as if the mist itself was swallowing her whole, but Roderick couldn't move. His legs felt as if they were rooted to the earth, and every breath he took was a struggle. It was as if the very forest was alive, its veins stretching deep into the ground, curling up around his soul and pulling him closer to the cursed heart of it all. The trees seemed to loom, bending toward him, their branches gnarled and twisted like fingers reaching from the grave. And then there was the feeling that he had long feared, the presence of something vast and terrible lurking beneath the earth. The woman's voice was now a distant murmur, swallowed by the rising storm, as the wind began to howl through the clearing. A shiver of dread ran down his spine. He could hear it now, something whispering, not from her, but from the forest itself. The same voices he'd heard in the ruins of the hollow cathedral, now louder, clearer. These were the voices of the damned, the souls bound to this cursed place, and they were calling him to the well. His gaze fell to the black stone of the well, its ancient edges eroded by the passage of time but still standing strong against the forces of nature. The rumbling grew louder, and as he watched, something began to stir from the depths, slow, deliberate, as if it had been waiting for him. There, at the surface of the well, something began to rise. A shadow. Dark and formless, its edges shifting like smoke. It hovered just above the water, undulating with a kind of restless hunger. The figure in the well rose further. The mist parted as it climbed, an apparition of a man or a creature, its body stretched, impossibly thin, its face a black void. No eyes. No features. Just an endless, yawning darkness that consumed everything in its path. Roderick stepped back, his breath catching in his throat as the figure climbed higher. It wasn't just a shadow, it was a presence, something that transcended the boundaries of the world he knew. He could feel it now, an ancient malevolence, an intelligence, waiting for him to act. waiting for him to be its next victim. The ground beneath him shifted once more, and he found himself falling backward into the well's shadow. His back hit the earth, the impact sending a shock through his body, but he barely felt it. His mind was numb with terror, his limbs frozen as the dark figure continued to rise from the depths. The voices grew louder, screaming now, begging for release. The sound was deafening, a chorus of souls trapped within the forest, forever tormented by the curse that had bound them. Roderick's hands reached out, grasping for anything that might help him fight the pull of the well. He heard a voice, deep, rich, and hollow. Not the woman's voice, but something far older, far more powerful. "Do you see now?" it whispered. "Do you understand? The forest has claimed you." Suddenly, the mist around him thickened, closing in until it was impossible to see more than a few inches in front of him. Roderick's chest tightened as the temperature dropped. His breath came out in a thick, white fog. The darkness of the well stretched up toward the sky like a hungry maw. He had no choice now. His hand moved without thought, reaching for the key that still hung from his neck, the key that had guided him here, to this moment. He had believed, for so long, that it was a relic from the village's past, something to banish the curse, something to end it. But now he realized the truth. This was the key to something far darker, far more sinister. The voice in the mist echoed again, its tone more insistent now. "You must understand, she was never meant to escape. She was bound to this place, like the rest of us. And now, you will join her." Roderick's fingers brushed the key, and as they did, a shock of coldness shot through his body, almost as if the key itself had been waiting for him to touch it. His vision blurred, and he felt himself slipping, falling into the depths of the well, into the waiting darkness that threatened to consume him whole. But then, something shifted. The forest seemed to pulse with energy, the ground beneath him shaking as if the very earth was alive. Roderick fought against it, his breath ragged, his mind racing. He had to act. He had to break the cycle, stop this eternal torment. He wasn't just an observer. He wasn't just a victim. With one final surge of strength, he clutched the key tightly in his hand, raising it above his head. As the light from the key flickered dimly in the oppressive dark, something in the air shifted. The forest paused, holding its breath. The shadowy figure in the well seemed to hesitate, its form flickering, as if it was unsure of what was to come. The silence was deafening, and then, with a sound like the cracking of ancient stone, the key began to glow. A soft, pulsing light that filled the clearing, pushing the darkness away. The well, the forest, the whispers, they all began to retreat. The air grew warmer, and the oppressive weight of the curse lifted, leaving behind only the sound of Roderick's ragged breath. But as the light from the key grew brighter, Roderick felt something shift inside him, something terrible, something dark. The curse wasn't gone. It had merely been transferred. He could feel it, clawing at him from the inside. He had broken the surface of the curse, but it had not been destroyed. It was bound to him now, just as it had been bound to the forest, the village, the souls trapped within. Roderick's heart beat with an unfamiliar heaviness. He turned toward the clearing, the well now silent, the darkness receding. But he knew, he could feel it, he was not free. The forest was still with him. The curse was still with him. And it was far from over. Chapter 9. The Price of Freedom. Roderick's heart drummed in his chest, the rhythm a frantic reminder that the darkness was not done with him. Though the land around him had quieted, Though the forest seemed to retreat into its own shadowed corners, he could feel the presence still lingering, wrapping itself around his soul like a thick, suffocating fog. The light from the key had dimmed, fading into the twilight, but its aftertaste clung to him, cold, unsettling. That he stood at the edge of the clearing, staring at the place where the well had once been, but now it was merely a void, a scar upon the earth where something ancient and monstrous had risen. He could still hear the faint whispers of the spirits, the voices of those long lost to the cursed forest, tearing through the silence like shards of glass. It's not over, Roderick, the wind seemed to whisper, carrying a voice both new and familiar. It was as though the earth itself had spoken, its breath heavy with the weight of 1,000 tormented souls. The forest will not forgive. It will never forgive. Roderick's fingers curled around the key hanging from his neck, the cool metal sending an unsettling chill through his fingertips. The key had been his guide, his salvation, or had it? In his mind, he replayed the moments before the light had exploded from it, before the forest had hesitated, as though it had been unsure of its next move. And yet, something darker had shifted in the air that night. Something foul. For the first time since the start of this cursed journey, he began to wonder whether the key was the answer, or whether it had been the cause of all this. It felt as though he had been drawn into an inescapable circle, a loop that would never truly end. The weight of his actions hung like an iron chain around his neck, each step he took deeper into the forest only dragging him closer to whatever fate awaited him. He glanced back at the village. It lay beyond the tree line, where faint lights flickered like dying stars. The people, once free to walk the earth, now bound to the land by the curse of the forest, would never know peace again. If Roderick was to find redemption, if he was to end the torment once and for all, he knew that it would come at a price, his very soul. Yes, if the thought alone summoned it, a figure appeared before him, materializing from the mist as if the very air had conjured her from his fears. The woman, the spirit who had led him to this point, now stood before him once more. Her face, pale and sorrowful, was half veiled in the dark mist, her eyes gleaming with unspeakable knowledge. "You have come too far, Roderick," she whispered, her voice trembling like the wind through the leaves. "You have broken the seal, and yet you do not understand the cost." He gritted his teeth, taking a hesitant step toward her. "The key, it should have freed us." "Freed you?" she scoffed softly. "The key was never meant to free anyone. It was the price. A price too steep for you to understand." Her words burrowed into him like a worm, gnawing at the edge of his thoughts. He tried to force the doubt away, tried to deny her claim, but something inside him stirred, something ancient, something buried deep within him. "No," he insisted, "the curse is lifted. I saw it, felt it." She shook her head slowly, the motion like a cold wind sweeping through the clearing. "What you saw was only a moment's reprieve. A fleeting illusion, a reflection of your own desires. The forest does not forgive so easily. The dead do not relent so easily. The curse still lives, but now it lives within you." Her words struck him like a blow. The weight of them crashed into him, suffocating him as he began to feel it, the stirrings of something inside him, pressing against his ribs, crawling beneath his skin. The darkness. It had found him. Roderick staggered backward, his mind racing. He touched his chest, as if trying to claw away whatever had begun to invade him. His breath came in shallow gasps, his eyes wide with terror as the air grew thick with an unnatural cold. The woman stepped closer, her form blurring with the mist. You were always meant to be the sacrifice, Roderick. The key is not a gift, it is a tether. A tether that binds the living to the dead. It was always you. You were chosen. The forest has claimed you, just as it claimed the village. The shadows around him seemed to breathe, swirling and folding in on themselves, thickening like ink in water. Roderick could feel them now, crawling across his skin, seeping into his veins like poison. He was no longer simply an observer, he was part of it. A part of the curse that had cursed this land. No, he gasped, the words strangling in his throat as the terror took hold of him. I won't be your puppet. The woman's face softened, a ghost of pity crossing her features. You never had a choice, Roderick. The forest's hunger is ancient, and it can never be satisfied. And now, it will feed on you. The shadows pressed closer, and Roderick felt a coldness that consumed him, seeping into his bones. His vision blurred, and he fell to his knees, clutching the ground as if it were the only thing holding him in place. The whispers of the dead, once a distant hum, now filled his ears like 1,000 screams, each voice louder, more insistent than the last. Suddenly, the ground beneath him trembled, and a deep crack split the earth. Roderick's head snapped up, his eyes widening in disbelief as the forest around him seemed to come alive, roots clawing through the earth, branches twisting like the fingers of some great, slumbering beast awakening that he was no longer alone. Something was coming. The earth shook again, this time more violently. The ground cracked open, and from the fissures, dark tendrils reached up toward him. He struggled to move, but his limbs were paralyzed, as if the forest itself held him in its grip. No. Roderick screamed, his voice hoarse, desperate, but it was too late. With a final, deafening crash, the earth split open fully, and from it, the spirits of the forest, the vengeful dead, began to emerge. They rose from the depths like phantoms, their faces twisted in torment, their eyes empty of life. Roderick could not escape. He could not fight. His body trembled, and the dark energy surrounded him, dragging him deeper into its depths. His mind screamed for freedom, but his voice was swallowed by the vast, unrelenting darkness. The curse had claimed him. And now, it would never let him go. Chapter 10. The Final Echo. Roderick's breath came in ragged, desperate gasps as the vengeful spirits closed in on him, their spectral hands reaching for his body, pulling him toward the dark abyss that now split the earth. The mist, thick with the ancient power of the forest, pressed in on him, heavy and suffocating. His limbs were leaden, his strength drained, as though the forest itself had begun to consume him from within. Each time he tried to move, the darkness seemed to swallow him whole. The dead whispered around him, their voices an endless tide of grief, anger, and hunger. They circled him, their eyes hollow and lifeless, their faces twisted in agony. Roderick could hear their words, though he could not understand them, each utterance a song of sorrow that threatened to drown his very soul. You belong to the forest now, there is no escape, you will never be free. He clenched his fists, the cold metal of the key digging into his chest, the only thing that anchored him to the fleeting reality that remained. His fingers brushed it, a fleeting touch, as if he could somehow draw strength from it, but it felt alien now, distant. The key, he thought in a haze, the memories of his journey flickering like distant flames. The key had brought him this far, had been the instrument that led him into the heart of the curse. But it had also led him here, to the very edge of his destruction. The ground trembled again, sending ripples through the mist, and Roderick's mind was seized by a terrifying realization. The spirits weren't the only threat, the earth itself was part of the curse, part of the very essence of the forest. The land craved what had been taken from it, and it would never release its hold. But then, amidst the chaos and the darkness, something strange stirred within him. A flicker of something forgotten, a sense of clarity that cut through the fog of terror. He had not been the only one to enter the cursed forest. There had been others before him, others who had heard the call of the forest, who had come seeking salvation, but had been consumed by the curse just as he was now. They had not been able to break it. But Roderick was different. He wasn't just the man who had come to the forest, he was a part of it, just as the spirits were. He had been bound to the forest by blood, by fate, but now, he understood something the spirits did not. There was one thing the forest had not anticipated, one thing that the dead could not fathom. Roderick was not alone. With every ounce of strength he could muster, Roderick drew the key from his chest, holding it up before him. The metal gleamed faintly in the dim light, the runes on it shimmering with a soft, ethereal glow. The key was not just a symbol of the curse, it was the curse itself. But it was also the way out. The spirits shrieked, their cries growing louder, a cacophony of rage that threatened to tear him apart. But Roderick was beyond fear now. The forest had stolen enough from him. It had taken the lives of his ancestors, and it had almost taken his own. But he would not let it claim his soul. The air around him grew colder, the mist thickening, pressing in on him. The tendrils of darkness stretched toward him, but Roderick stood tall, lifting the key higher, his fingers trembling not from fear, but from determination. I break your hold, forest. I break your curse, he whispered through clenched teeth, his voice steady despite the overwhelming dread, and as he spoke, the key began to hum. The sound was low, almost imperceptible, but it grew steadily louder, vibrating with a power that seemed to shake the very fabric of the earth. The runes on the key pulsed with light, and the darkness around him began to retreat, writhing in pain as though it could not bear the light of the key. The spirits howled in fury, their forms flickering and distorting as the energy from the key began to unravel the web of their torment. They reached for Roderick, but their forms disintegrated as the light washed over them, their faces contorting in silent screams before they faded into nothingness. The ground cracked again, but this time, it was not the earth trying to consume him. The fissures in the land began to close, the roots that had once reached out in hunger now retreating, withdrawing into the soil as the curse began to lift. The air lightened, the weight of the forest's power slowly ebbing away. Roderick staggered backward, his body shaking, his mind reeling from the sheer force of what was happening. The key was glowing brightly now, a blinding light that surrounded him, filling every corner of the forest with its brilliance. And in that light, Roderick saw something strange, something that gave him hope. He saw the faces of the lost villagers, those who had been consumed by the curse, rising from the depths of the forest. Their eyes were no longer hollow with despair, but filled with peace. The key had done it. The curse had been broken, but the forest would not forget. The spirits would not forgive. With one final, deafening cry, the last of the darkness was cast out, the curse lifted from the land. And in that moment, Roderick understood. He had not just broken the curse, he had freed the souls that had been bound to it for centuries. As the light of the key faded, Roderick found himself standing alone in the clearing. The mist had cleared, and the forest was silent. The trees, once twisted and gnarled, now stood straight and tall, as if they too had been released from the grip of the darkness. The village, once cursed, now stood in the distance, bathed in the golden light of dawn. The whispers of the dead had ceased, replaced by the sound of life returning to the land. Roderick stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the first light of morning spill across the horizon. The forest was no longer a prison. The spirits were at rest. The curse was broken and he was free, but as he turned to leave, the faintest whisper brushed against his ear. "You were the one who freed us. You were the one who broke the curse." Roderick smiled softly, feeling the weight of the key in his pocket. It had been a long, dark journey, but in the end, it had been worth it. The forest had claimed him, but he had taken back what was his.